Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Amity Foundation listening session on culturally affirming family reunification and trial family support, reentry programming for women, support services, and returning LGBTQI+ residents. We will begin with introductions. I will introduce myself and then pass it over to my team. So my name is Joanne Sanchez. I am the project director for the third administrator, and I will pass it over to Alan.
Good morning, Alan Richards. I'm the Los Angeles Regional Administrator for Amity Foundation. And I'll pass it to Carmen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carmen Jacinto. I'm with Amity Foundation. I'm the CEO of Community-Based Projects. Wendy? I'll pass it on to Rebecca.
Okay.
Go ahead, Wendy, sorry.
Oh, that's all right. No. My name is Wendy Thompson. I work for Amity Foundation. I am on the TPA crew, and I am the Associate Director of Training and Technical Assistance. Rebecca?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Rebecca Gray. I am the Grants Administrator for the Third Party Administrator Project for Amity Foundation. I'll pass it back to Joanne.
Rebecca, and can we have the next slide, please, Carmen?
For the purposes of some housekeeping, first, we want to make sure everyone understands that this session is being recorded. This session is being recorded for the purpose of capturing information to be utilized later on in the process. Also want to mention the raised hand instructions. When accessing Zoom through a computer browser or smartphone Zoom app, tab, scroll to the reactions, and you will see a raised hand feature. When accessing Zoom through the smartphone browser, bottom tab, scroll to more, there should be 3 buttons. If you click on those 3 buttons, you will see a raised hand feature. For those individuals who may be experiencing any technical difficulties, there's dial-in information provided in the chat or on the telephone. The raised hand function is *9. To unmute yourself, it's *6. If you also choose to put any comments or statements or suggestions in the chat, those will be read during the session. For Spanish interpretation, please click on the globe below and then select your language. With that, I'll turn it back over to Joanne.
Thank you so much, Alan. Amity Foundation has been selected as a third-party opportunities. I wanted to create a space for community to give feedback, insight, or recommendations in the particular subject area that we are speaking of today. So next slide, please, Carmen. Next slide. Oh, okay. Thank you, Carmen. So when considering the subject of culturally affirming family unification and pretrial family support, reentry programming for women and also LGBTQ, when you think about the program area we're here to discuss today, what are the gaps in services that you know about in your Again, please raise your hand. We'll be calling on folks based on who raises their hand, and we will call in order.
Tony?
Tony Bryant.
Yes, I would say one of the main gaps in service. Hi, I'm Tony Bryan. I'm with Mentors Inc. One of the main gaps in services that I notice just from the services that I provide is the lack of housing for transgender individuals. I have a house now, and honestly, I have one client in it, and it's a transgender client. And I had to move that client from one of my interim housing sites because she had nowhere to go. And so now I just have one client in the building because I'm trying to protect her because she is, vulnerable. And yeah, there's no place for her to go. And I cannot afford for her to be in that building by herself, but I'm doing it. And yeah, so that's definitely a gap that I see, is the lack of housing and services for the transgender community.
Thank you, Tony. Anyone else like to make a comment? Please raise your hand.
If anyone is having trouble raising their hand or getting through in another way, you can post your comment in the chat and I will read it aloud to the group. So that's another option.
Any other feedback, recommendations?
I do have a comment from Jennifer Torres agreeing with the housing issue. Housing is needed.
Again, these are for the categories of culturally reaffirming family reunification and pretrial family support, reentry programming for women, and LGBTQI+ services. What are the gaps in your community?
I just wanted to add that I have a COVID site, and at one point we only had 2 people in the COVID site, and the county started sending me the entire LGBTQ population at that point. But it was a COVID site, so that wasn't appropriate housing. So that's just more a confirmation that there's no housing. Because I had 6 or 7 transgender or non, I don't even know what the word is. But anyhow, I had 6 transgender or LGBTQ people that were what they called unplaceable. How was that? Explain to me, somebody.
Thank you, Tony.
We have another comment in the chat from Alejandra. Mental health services, as due to COVID-19, resources are limited. So that is another identified gap.
Any other comments or feedback before we move on to the next question? Okay, next slide, Carmen. Question number 2, Given the categories we are discussing and the services we have been talking about, what changes in your community would mean that the services have been successful? What type of outcomes do you need to see in your communities to mean that things are kind of transitioning and you're seeing successes? Please raise your hand, or you can put your question or comment, I'm sorry, not question, but you can put your comment or feedback in the chat.
Tony?
I don't want to be the one to keep answering all the questions, but this is, I guess, near and dear to my heart because of what I'm doing. And I guess the change for me would mean that people like Stacy have somewhere to go, you know, and that they're welcome wherever they go, you know.
Thank you, Tony.
I'm going to post a link to an online form that also contains the questions we're asking today. In case people need to think more about these questions or answer offline. Also, you can feel free to send this survey out to people, but that's another opportunity to get your feedback in about these questions we're asking.
Anybody else would like to give feedback or comment on question number 2? Please raise your hand, or you can put your comment in the chat.
I have a comment for question number 2 in the chat from Alejandra. I would say seeing therapists and counselors following up with the appointed sessions. That would be the change.
Thank you, Alejandra.
Oh, sorry. For example, due to high demand, appointments with therapists are once a month.
Pierre?
Thank you all for holding space. I think for me, one of the changes that I think would really signal success would be having more folks that would be accessing these services or impacted by the issues that we're discussing, actually involved in the planning and evaluation efforts of this. I think oftentimes it's the service providers or folks external from the community who are providing feedback, such as me in this situation, right? I'm not somebody who identifies, you know, but I'm here because I care. And the thing is that I think we need to just build more capacity, bring folks more in, build more access into these systems, work with the councils that we already have, such as the Transgender Advisory Council, things of that nature, to really make sure that we're getting as much feedback, critique, as much recommendations, I think, as possible from folks that are actually in the community, in the LGBTQ community. So that's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre.
I have a comment in the chat from Walter. We are experiencing a challenge with access to therapy for our youth. Wait lists.
Thank you. Any other feedback or comments on question number 2 before to the next question? Okay, Carmen, next slide. We are seeking to assist in reaching as many organizations as possible. Do you have any suggestions about email lists, convenings, coalitions, or other places we might be able to reach service providers? Again, we are trying to reach as many community-based organizations and providers as possible. So any recommendations on this? I know, Pierre, you mentioned Transgender Advisory Council, so other organizations that we can reach out to get this information out. You can, if you don't want to raise your hand, you can also put your suggestions in the chat.
We have some suggestions from Wendy Gomez in the chat. LARRP, LARP, Trans Latino Coalition, the ATI Incubation Academy. From Pierre, the Trans Latina Coalition, Gender Justice LA, Somos Familia Valle. From Walter, CBOs that are involved with youth diversion. From Deb Roberson, she suggests Prevention Network.
Walter, if you have any of those names of those organizations that work with youth, if you can put them in the chat, that would be great.
Thank you, Walter. Walter has put in the chat that they will compile a list and send.
Great, thank you, Walter.
Thank you. Pierre suggests LA City Neighborhood Justice Program.
Thank you, Pierre. We will be moving on to the next question. Please feel free to add any organizations as this session continues. Just add them to the chat. Next slide, Carmen. Question number 4, do you have any recommendations regarding how we might ensure equity throughout the funding application process and after the funding awards are made? Please raise your hand, or you can put your comment in the chat.
Tony?
It's me again. Well, I think that if you can make the application process more a little simpler, because a lot of us don't have like fancy grant writers and all that who understand all that. Just make the application process a little simpler, that we can, like, that I can go in and fill out everything and apply, that I don't need to hire a consultant or, you know, some other person to help me apply for a grant or a funding opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And again, for everybody that is on the call, it's important that we get this feedback so that we do know what all community-based providers challenges and barriers are. So thank you for that, Tony.
In the chat, Deb says, ensure that you reach out to the grassroots CBOs and provide additional training once they receive the funding.
Thank you.
Pierre in the chat says, build in capacity building funding or administrative overhead costs into the funding contracts.
Thank you, Pierre. Any other comments, feedback, recommendations on ensuring equity throughout the funding application process and after the funding awards are made?
Pierre also suggests earmark funds for organizations with $300,000 or less annual revenue, or include a clause ensuring larger organizations have to subcontract with smaller organizations.
Thank you, Pierre. That's helpful feedback.
Walter has posted in the chat, are you considering the CBOs listed in 211 or 1 degree?
Thank you, Walter. We'll take a look at that.
Pierre suggests use the Jesse, Jesi /Jetty, JEDI, as ways to measure need across the county.
Thank you again, Pierre. Any other comments or suggestions? We move on.
Pierre suggests make reporting simple.
Thank you, Pierre.
Tony Bryant has written into the chat to say agree with keeping reporting simple. Pierre also suggests avoid the reimbursement fund distribution structure if possible. Give the money up front or break it up into payments.
Thank you. Any other feedback or comments before we move on? Next slide, Carmen. Thank you, everyone, for participating and joining our listening session today. We will be staying on for the next 15 chat, and please put any recommendations for community providers that we can reach out to, coalitions and other groups. Thank you again. We thank you for your time and have a great day.
Here has another suggestion around equity, or another suggestion. Beyond breaking up funding based on issue areas, I think it may be helpful to develop tracks for funding, similar to the Elevate Youth California funding model that Sierra Health Foundation administers. They have a capacity building track for smaller organizations that essentially is meant to serve as a pipeline for the other tracks, more funding, more service deliverables. Deb says in the chat, once community-based organizations are approved to receive funding, provide the funding immediately because most small companies do not have startup money to pay for staff. And that's an equity issue, I believe.
Thank you, Pierre and Deb. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. This session has ended, but we will be sticking around for further comments or feedback. Please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. Also, if you'd like to share our next listening session coming up, please share that with your community, other community-based organizations that you know.
Pierre said in the chat, thank you for your time, y'all, and for holding space to have this conversation. Take care. Thank you, Pierre, for being here.
Thank you, Pierre.
So I am taking a moment to once again post the information about the online survey in the chat in case you want to answer these questions later, or if you can pass the survey along to anyone you think might be interested.
Again, I want to just thank everybody for joining us today. We will be staying on for a few more minutes to take on any more suggestions or comments. And also put it in the chat. All right, I think we're going to end the session now. So thank you everybody for joining. Appreciate your time and have a great day.